Have you ever wondered what you'd do if you found strangers living in the one place you thought was yours alone? The lighthouse keeper's cottage sat at the edge of the cliffs like a forgotten memory. White paint peeling under years of salt spray and neglect. Margaret Chen had inherited it from her grandmother 3 years ago, but had never found the time to visit. Work consumed everything. As chief financial officer of a major tech company in Seattle, she measured her life in quarterly reports and board meetings, not in memories or coastal sunsets. The heart attack changed that. One moment she was presenting third-quarter projections. The next she was on the floor of the conference room, her assistant screaming for someone to call an ambulance. The doctors were blunt. Severe stress, overwork, a body pushed beyond its limits. She needed to step back, to rest, to find somewhere quiet. The lighthouse cottage, abandoned for so long, seemed like the only answer. Margaret drove up the narrow coastal road with her windows down, letting the October wind tangle her hair. The doctor had given her strict orders. 3 months of complete rest. No laptops, no conference calls, no stress. She had fought him at first, insisting the company needed her, but he had been unmovable. Her assistant would manage things. The world would not end because she took time to heal. As her car rounded the final bend, Margaret saw the cottage and slammed on the brakes. Smoke curled from the chimney. Flower boxes overflowed with autumn blooms beneath windows that gleamed clean in the afternoon light. A vegetable garden stretched along the south side of the property, neat rows of late-season greens and root vegetables. Someone had repaired the stone wall that bordered the property, rebuilt the steps leading to the front door. Her grandmother's cottage, abandoned and crumbling the last time she had seen photos of it, looked like a home. Margaret got out of the car slowly, her hand instinctively moving to her chest. No stress. The doctor's words echoed in her mind. She walked toward the cottage, each step feeling heavier than the last. Through the window she could see movement. A woman stood at the stove, stirring something in a pot. A small boy sat at the table, coloring. Margaret opened the door without knocking. It was her house, after all. The woman at the stove whirled around, wooden spoon in hand. She was younger than Margaret expected, maybe early 30s, with dark hair pulled into a messy bun and kind eyes that widened with shock. The boy looked up from his coloring, curious rather than frightened. "Who are you?" Margaret heard herself ask, though her voice sounded distant, controlled despite the racing of her pulse. The spoon clattered to the floor. "I can explain. You're in my house." Margaret fought to keep her breathing steady, remembering the doctor's warnings about stress and anger. "This is my property." "I know." The woman stepped forward, hands raised as if approaching a frightened animal. "I know this is your house, the lighthouse keeper's cottage. Your grandmother was Ann Chen. I'm Elena Vasquez, and this is my son, Daniel. Please, let me explain before you call the police." Margaret pulled out her phone, but didn't dial. "You have 2 minutes." Elena spoke quickly, words tumbling over each other. She had been a marine biologist at the university, studying tide pools and coastal ecosystems. Her husband had been a fisherman. There had been a storm, a rogue wave, a recovery effort that never found a body. The grief had been crushing, but worse had been the bills. Medical debt from her son's premature birth, the mortgage, the funeral costs. She had lost everything. "The cottage was abandoned," Elena said, her voice breaking. Everyone in town said it had been empty for years, that the owner never came, that it was just rotting away. I needed somewhere to go, somewhere safe for Daniel. I didn't have anywhere else. Margaret looked around the cottage. Everything was immaculate. New curtains on the windows, fresh paint on the walls, her grandmother's old furniture restored and polished. Through the window, she could see the lighthouse itself, its red paint fresh and bright, the lens housing gleaming. "You painted the lighthouse?" "It took me 2 months." Elena wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "Your grandmother loved that lighthouse. There are photos of her all over the cottage with it. I thought, if I was going to stay here, I should take care of it properly, take care of everything the way she would have wanted. Daniel spoke up, his voice small. Are we in trouble, Mama? I don't know, sweetheart. Margaret felt the familiar tightness in her chest, the warning sign she had learned to recognize. She closed her eyes, counted to 10, focused on her breathing. No stress, no anger, just breathe. How long have you been here? She asked. 7 months. And you never tried to find out who owned the property? Elena's face flushed. I did. I found out your name. Found you online. You're important. Successful. I knew if I contacted you, you'd send lawyers, police. Daniel and I would end up in a shelter or worse. I thought maybe if I just took care of the place, made it beautiful again, that would be enough. That maybe you'd never come. But I did come. Yes. Elena straightened her shoulders. So what happens now? Do you call the police? Do we have time to pack our things? Margaret looked at the boy, who had gone very quiet, his small hands clutching a blue crayon. She thought about her empty apartment in Seattle, the takeout containers in her fridge, the silence that had become her only companion. She thought about her grandmother, who had lived in this cottage for 50 years, who had tended the lighthouse even after it was automated, who had believed that some duties transcended practicality. I need to sit down, Margaret said. Elena rushed to pull out a chair. Margaret sank into it, suddenly exhausted. The drive from Seattle had been 6 hours, and she felt every mile in her bones. Are you okay? Elena hovered nearby, uncertain. You're very pale. Should I call someone? I had a heart attack 3 weeks ago, Margaret heard herself say. I came here to recover. I didn't expect to find anyone. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the sound of waves against the cliffs below and Daniel's quiet coloring. I'll leave, Elena finally said. Just give me a day or two to find somewhere to go. I promise we won't cause any trouble. Margaret thought about the doctor's orders. 3 months of rest, complete peace and quiet. Having strangers in her house was the opposite of that. But looking at Elena's face, at the desperation barely hidden behind the facade of calm, she remembered something her grandmother used to say. The sea doesn't care about your plans. Sometimes you just have to adjust your sails. 1 week, Margaret said. I'll give you 1 week to find somewhere else. But I'm staying too. It's my house. Of course. Elena's relief was palpable. Thank you. Thank you so much. Daniel and I will stay out of your way. You can have the big bedroom upstairs. We've been sleeping in the smaller room, which was my grandmother's sewing room. I didn't change anything, Elena said quickly. Her sewing machine is still there, all her supplies. We just sleep on a mattress on the floor. Everything else is exactly how we found it. Margaret nodded, too tired to argue further. I need to bring in my bags. I'll help. Elena was already moving toward the door. No, I can manage. But when Margaret stood, the world tilted slightly. Elena was there in an instant, steadying her. You need to rest, Elena said firmly. Doctor's orders, right? I'll get your bags. You sit down and I'll make you some tea. Margaret wanted to argue, to insist she didn't need help from the woman who had invaded her property, but her body overruled her pride. She sat back down. Elena brought in her luggage efficiently, then returned to the kitchen. She moved with practiced ease, filling a kettle, setting it on the stove, pulling down cups from the cabinet as if she had lived here for years. Which, Margaret supposed, she had. Chamomile or peppermint? Elena asked. Chamomile. Daniel approached the table cautiously, his coloring book under his arm. Are you going to make us leave? He asked Margaret directly. Daniel. Don't bother Miss Chen, Elena said sharply. It's fine. Margaret looked at the boy. He couldn't be more than 5, with his mother's dark eyes and a spray of freckles across his nose. "I'm not going to make you leave right away. Your mother has a week to find somewhere else to live." "Will it be by the ocean too?" "I don't know. I like the ocean." Daniel opened his coloring book to show her a picture he had drawn. It was crude but recognizable. The lighthouse, the cottage, the cliffs. "I watch the whales from the lighthouse sometimes. Mama takes me up there." "You go into the lighthouse?" Elena set the tea down in front of Margaret, with perhaps a bit more force than necessary. "I have the key. I found it in the cottage. The lighthouse is automated, but someone needs to check on it periodically. Make sure the lens is clean, that the mechanism is working properly. Your grandmother's name is still on the service log. No one's been out to check it in years. So you just decided to do it yourself?" "Someone had to." Elena met her gaze steadily. "The lighthouse matters. It keeps ships safe. Your grandmother would have wanted someone to care for it." Margaret wanted to be angry, wanted to feel righteous indignation about this trespasser presuming to know what her grandmother would have wanted, but she was too exhausted. The tea was perfect, the right temperature, the right strength. The cottage was warm and clean and smelled like home, like her grandmother's cooking, like memories Margaret had buried under spreadsheets and strategic plans. "I'm going upstairs to rest," she said, standing carefully. "The bedroom is ready," Elena said. "Fresh sheets, clean towels in the bathroom. If you need anything, just call." Margaret climbed the narrow stairs, each step an effort. The bedroom was exactly as she remembered from childhood visits. Her grandmother's furniture polished and gleaming, fresh flowers in a vase by the window. Someone, Elena, had made this room ready for her, had prepared for her arrival even though they had never met. She lay down on the bed and was asleep before she could think about how strange it all was. When Margaret woke, the sun was setting, painting the room in shades of orange and gold. Downstairs, she could hear soft voices, the clink of dishes, the ordinary sounds of a family at dinner. The smell of cooking wafted up the stairs. Garlic, tomatoes, herbs. She sat up slowly, testing her body for any warning signs. Her chest felt fine, her breathing steady. The nap had helped. She found her phone and saw 3 missed calls from her assistant, 2 from board members, a dozen emails marked urgent. She turned the phone off. Downstairs, Elena and Daniel were at the table, plates of pasta before them. They both looked up when Margaret appeared. "I saved you some dinner," Elena said, already rising to get a plate. "You don't have to feed me. You're recovering from a heart attack. You need to eat properly." Elena served the pasta with a simple red sauce, added bread and a salad. "Sit. Eat." Margaret wanted to argue, but the food smelled too good. She sat down at the table, this table that had been her grandmother's, in this cottage that was supposed to be empty, with these strangers who had made it home. The pasta was delicious, simple but perfect, the sauce rich with tomatoes and basil from the garden she had seen outside. "This is very good," Margaret admitted. "Thank you." Elena pushed the bread basket toward her. "Your grandmother had excellent herbs growing wild around the property. I've been maintaining them, starting new beds. The soil here is difficult, but some things grow well." "Mama's a scientist," Daniel announced proudly. "She studies ocean stuff." "Marine biology," Elena corrected gently. "Or I did, before." "Before your husband died?" Elena's face tightened, but she nodded. "I was working on my doctorate, studying the impact of climate change on tidal ecosystems. I had a research grant, was teaching part-time. Then everything fell apart. I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you." Elena cleared her throat. "Daniel, finish your dinner. It's almost bedtime." The boy ate obediently, and Margaret found herself watching them. The easy familiarity between mother and son, the gentle corrections, the love that needed no words. When was the last time she had eaten dinner with someone? Really eaten, not working through a business lunch or grabbing takeout at her desk. After dinner, Elena bathed Daniel in the small bathroom downstairs while Margaret stood at the kitchen window, watching the lighthouse beams sweep across the darkening ocean. Every 15 seconds, the light rotated, a steady rhythm that her grandmother used to say was like the heartbeat of the coast. All clean. Daniel appeared in pajamas decorated with whales. "Good night, Miss Chen." "Good night, Daniel." Elena tucked him into the small room that had been the sewing room, reading him a story in a soft voice that carried through the thin walls. Margaret found herself listening, drawn into the tale of a brave little fish who ventured beyond the reef. When Elena emerged, she looked tired, but unsurprised to find Margaret still in the kitchen. "Coffee?" Elena offered. "Or would that be bad for your heart?" "1 cup won't kill me." Elena made the coffee in an old percolator that Margaret recognized as her grandmother's. They sat at the table in comfortable silence, listening to the ocean and the wind. "Tell me about my grandmother," Margaret said finally. "Did you ever meet her?" "No. She was already gone when I came to town, but everyone here remembers her. The shopkeepers, the harbor master, the old fishermen. They all have stories about Ann Chen, the lighthouse keeper who stayed long after the automation, who knew the weather better than any meteorologist, who could predict storms by watching the birds. She was stubborn. She was dedicated." Elena smiled slightly. "There's a difference. The people here loved her. When I told them I was staying in her cottage, taking care of it, they helped me, brought me vegetables from their gardens, showed me how to maintain the lighthouse, shared their memories. Your grandmother made a difference here. She mattered to this community." Margaret felt something tighten in her chest. But it wasn't pain. It was regret. "I should have visited more. I kept meaning to, but work was always so demanding. There was always another project, another deadline. And then she was gone. And this place was just property to manage from afar. She left it to you because she believed you'd come back eventually. There are letters." "Letters?" Elena got up and retrieved a wooden box from a shelf. "I found these in the attic. They're addressed to you. I didn't read them. They're yours." Margaret opened the box with shaking hands. Inside were dozens of letters, all in her grandmother's careful handwriting, all addressed to Margaret but never sent. She picked up the one on top, dated 2 years before her grandmother's death. The letter was short and simple. Her grandmother wrote about the lighthouse, about the seals that had come to the cove below, about the garden and the weather. At the end, she had written, "You work too hard, little one. The ocean teaches us that rest is as important as motion, that tides must ebb as well as flow. Come home when you're ready. The lighthouse will wait." Margaret closed the letter carefully, her vision blurring. She knew. Grandmothers usually do. They sat in silence until the coffee was gone, and the night was full dark. Elena finally stood, collecting the cups. "I'll let you rest. Good night, Margaret." It was the first time Elena had used her first name, and Margaret found she didn't mind. "Good night, Elena, and thank you. For dinner, for the letters, for taking care of this place. It was the least I could do." After Elena had gone to bed, Margaret sat alone in the cottage, reading her grandmother's unsent letters by lamplight. The old woman had written about everything and nothing. The small joys of daily life, the beauty of the changing seasons, the lessons learned from living close to the sea. And always, at the end, a gentle reminder. Come home when you're ready. Margaret finally understood. Her grandmother hadn't meant come home to the cottage. She had meant come home to herself, to the person she had been, before ambition and achievement had consumed everything else. The morning came too quickly. Margaret woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the smell of fresh coffee. She dressed slowly, descended the stairs, and found Elena already working in the garden, Daniel playing nearby with toy trucks in the dirt. "Good morning," Elena called out, straightening up and brushing soil from her hands. "There's coffee in the kitchen, and I left you some breakfast. I'm just finishing the fall planting. These carrots should be ready by December if we're lucky." As if there would still be a we by December. Margaret poured coffee and sat on the front steps, watching Elena work. The woman moved with efficiency and care, her hands gentle with the seedlings, her voice patient, as she explained to Daniel what she was doing and why. A truck pulled up the narrow road, and an elderly man climbed out, carrying a basket. "Morning, Elena," he called out cheerfully. "Brought you those apples from my orchard like I promised. Should make good pie." He stopped short when he saw Margaret. "Oh, well now. You must be Anne's granddaughter, Tom Willis. I run the orchard up the hill. Margaret Chen." Tom set down the basket and extended his hand. His grip was firm, his eyes shrewd. "Elena mentioned you might be coming by. Didn't expect you to stay, though." "I'm recovering from a heart attack. Doctor's orders." "Ah, well, you came to the right place. Nothing heals like ocean air and Elena's cooking." He winked at Elena, who had gone pink. "Your grandmother used to say the same thing. Used to bring me her sourdough bread in exchange for apples. Miss that bread. Miss her." "Mr. Willis has been very kind," Elena said quickly. "He's helped with repairs around the property, brought us supplies." "Just doing what neighbors do." Tom retrieved his basket. "Elena here's been taking fine care of Anne's place. Better than it's been kept in years, if you don't mind me saying. Your grandmother would be pleased." After Tom left, Margaret turned to Elena. "How many people in town know you're here?" "Most of them. I'm not hiding, Margaret. I just couldn't afford to live anywhere else." Elena's voice held a note of defiance. "I've been honest with the neighbors about my situation. They've been kind enough not to report me for trespassing. Or they hoped I'd never show up to care. Maybe." Elena met her gaze. "But also because they trust me to take care of this place properly. Your grandmother was important to them. The lighthouse, this cottage. They're part of the community's identity. They'd rather see it lived in and loved than empty and rotting." Margaret couldn't argue with that logic, frustrating as it was. She spent the rest of the morning walking the property, examining everything Elena had done. The repairs were skilled and thoughtful. The woman had clearly researched proper restoration techniques, had sourced period-appropriate materials when possible. The garden was laid out efficiently, maximizing the challenging growing space. The lighthouse was pristine, its machinery well-maintained and logged meticulously. In the afternoon, Margaret climbed the spiral stairs inside the lighthouse, emerging at the top to find the lens housing gleaming, the mechanism moving smoothly. The view was breathtaking. Ocean stretched to the horizon, and below, the cliffs dropped away to a rocky cove where seals basked in the autumn sun. Elena appeared at the top of the stairs, slightly breathless. "I do weekly maintenance checks. There's a schedule in the logbook. Coast Guard regulations, even though it's automated now." "You've been very thorough. Your grandmother was the official keeper for 40 years, even after automation. I found her logs, her records. She took it seriously. So do I." Elena moved to check a gauge, made a note in a small notebook. "The beacon has to be reliable. Lives depend on it. You care about this lighthouse more than most people who own them." Elena smiled sadly. "My husband died at sea. If there had been a lighthouse, if he'd seen the rocks in time, maybe." She shook her head. "I know it's not rational, but maintaining this one feels like honoring him, like preventing other families from losing what I lost." Margaret found herself without words. They stood together at the top of the lighthouse, watching the seals below and the endless roll of the waves, and for the first time in weeks, Margaret's chest felt light. That night, she called her assistant. "Margaret, thank God. We've been trying to reach you. The board wants to know when you're coming back. There's the Johnson merger, the restructuring proposal, I'm not coming back." The words surprised Margaret even as she said them. "What? But you're the CFO. You can't just—" "I almost died, Sarah. I worked myself into a heart attack at 43. I'm taking the leave the doctor prescribed. And then I'm taking more leave. And then I'm going to reevaluate what I want from life." Silence on the other end. Then, "Are you serious?" "Completely. But the company needs you." "The company will be fine. You're more than capable of handling things. And if the board doesn't like it, they can find a replacement." Margaret felt strangely calm, as if a weight she'd carried for years was finally lifting. "I'll send a formal letter tomorrow, but I wanted to tell you first. Thank you for everything, Sarah. You've been a good friend as well as a colleague." After she hung up, Margaret sat in the gathering darkness, listening to the ocean and feeling surprisingly at peace. Through the window, she could see Elena putting Daniel to bed, the soft glow of the lamp in the small room, the shadow of the woman bending to kiss her son goodnight. 1 week. That's what she'd promised. But already, Margaret was beginning to wonder what would happen when the week was over. The days fell into a rhythm. Margaret woke early, did the gentle exercises her doctor had prescribed, then joined Elena and Daniel for breakfast. She learned that Elena woke before dawn to check tide pools, documenting the species there for a research project she continued on her own, hoping one day to finish her doctorate. Daniel was bright and curious, full of questions about everything from stars to sea creatures to why grown-ups drank so much coffee. On the third day, Elena's ankle turned on the rocky path down to the cove. She tried to hide the injury, but Margaret saw her limping. "Let me see." "It's fine." "Elena, let me see." The ankle was swollen and already bruising. Margaret helped Elena inside, got ice, wrapped the injury properly. "You need to stay off this for at least a few days." "I can't. Daniel needs care, the garden needs tending, the lighthouse. I'll handle it." Elena stared at her. I'm not completely helpless. I may have spent the last 20 years in boardrooms, but I grew up visiting this cottage. My grandmother taught me plenty." Margaret stood up, channeling the executive authority that had served her well in countless negotiations. "You're going to rest that ankle. That's non-negotiable. Taking care of a 5-year-old proved more challenging than managing a corporate budget." Daniel was a whirlwind of energy and questions. He wanted to know why the sky was blue, why fish didn't drown, why Margaret's hair was shorter than his mama's, why grown-ups were always tired. Margaret found herself exhausted by noon, with lunch still to make, the lighthouse to check, and laundry multiplying mysteriously. "How do you do this every day?" she asked Elena, who was resting on the couch with her ankle elevated. "Practice. Lots and lots of practice. It's harder than running a Fortune 500 company. Different skills." Elena tried not to smile, though I imagine negotiating with toddlers and negotiating with boards have some similarities. By the end of the day, Margaret had burned dinner, let Daniel stay up too late, and forgotten to check one of the critical gauges in the lighthouse. But she had also built a fort out of couch cushions, learned the names of 17 different types of seashells, and heard Daniel laugh so hard he got hiccups. "You did well," Elena said after Daniel finally fell asleep. "He had fun." "I feel like I've run a marathon. Welcome to parenthood." The words hung between them. Margaret wasn't Daniel's parent. She was just the property owner, the woman who had every right to call the police and have them evicted. But somehow, in 3 days, the lines had blurred. On the 5th day, Tom Willis returned with more apples and a concerned expression. "Elena, there's a storm coming. Big one. You'll want to secure everything." Margaret looked at the clear blue sky skeptically. "Storm?" "Trust me," Tom said. When you've lived here as long as I have, you learn to read the signs. Your grandmother could always tell. She'd start preparing 2 days before the weather service even issued warnings. By evening, the first clouds appeared on the horizon. Margaret helped Elena move the potted plants, secure the garden beds, and check all the window latches. They brought in extra firewood, filled water containers, and made sure the emergency supplies were ready. "Is it really going to be that bad?" Margaret asked. "Coastal storms can be fierce," Elena said. "The wind comes off the ocean with nothing to stop it. Your grandmother's diary talks about storms that lasted 3 days, waves that came halfway up the cliffs. That night, the storm hit. Rain lashed the windows, and wind howled around the cottage like a living thing. Daniel woke crying, frightened by the noise. Elena tried to get up, but her ankle was still too weak. "I'll go," Margaret said. She found Daniel huddled in his bed, covers pulled up to his chin. "It's so loud." "I know, but we're safe here. This cottage has survived 100 years of storms. It's not going to fail us now. Can I sleep with you and Mama?" Margaret carried him to the larger bedroom, where Elena lay propped on pillows. Daniel burrowed between them, and they stayed awake listening to the storm rage outside. At one point, the power went out, plunging them into darkness broken only by the sweep of the lighthouse beam. "The lighthouse," Margaret said. "Should we check it?" "Not in this weather. The mechanism is designed to run without power. If something fails, we'll see it from here." Elena's voice was calm, and Margaret realized this woman had weathered storms like this before, alone with her child, keeping faith that the lighthouse would do its job. They talked through the night, voices soft so as not to wake Daniel. Elena spoke about her husband, about their dreams of raising their son by the ocean, teaching him to respect and love the sea that provided their livelihood. Margaret talked about her grandmother, about childhood summers spent here, about how she had promised to return, but never had until crisis forced her hand. "Do you regret it?" Elena asked. "Your career, I mean. All that time working instead of living?" Margaret thought about the question carefully. "I don't regret the work itself. I was good at it, and it mattered. But I regret the balance, or lack of it. I regret that work was all I had. No relationships, no hobbies, no life outside the office. When I collapsed on that conference room floor, my first thought wasn't about family or friends or legacy. It was about a spreadsheet I hadn't finished. That must have been frightening. Terrifying. Not the heart attack itself, but the realization of how empty my life was. If I had died, what would I have left behind? Money, yes. Success, certainly. But no love. No connection. No meaning beyond balance sheets. Elena was quiet for a moment. "My husband used to say that the sea teaches us what matters. It's vast and powerful, and completely indifferent to our plans and ambitions. Standing on a boat in the middle of the ocean, you realize how small you are, how precious each moment is. He said it made him appreciate everything more. The sunrise, Daniel's laugh, the taste of coffee in the morning. He sounds like he was a good man. He was. I miss him every day. But I've learned to keep living, for Daniel's sake and my own. That's what my husband would have wanted." By morning, the storm had passed, leaving a world washed clean and bright. Debris littered the property, but nothing was seriously damaged. Margaret and Elena spent the day cleaning up, and Margaret found herself actually enjoying the physical work, the clear cause and effect, the visible progress. On the 7th day, Margaret knew she had to make a decision. Elena's ankle was better, and she had found a small apartment 3 towns over. It was affordable, close to a library where Daniel could attend story time, near a marine research station where Elena hoped to volunteer. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. "I can be out by tomorrow morning," Elena said at breakfast, not meeting Margaret's eyes. "I've called a friend with a truck. We don't have much to move." Daniel pushed his cereal around in his bowl, unusually quiet. Margaret felt her chest tighten, and for a moment she panicked, thinking it was her heart. But no, this was different. This was grief at the thought of this cottage empty again, of eating breakfast alone, of no more questions about seashells or wild giggles at bedtime stories. "Don't go," Margaret heard herself say. Elena looked up sharply. "What? Don't go. Stay. Both of you, stay here." "Margaret, you can't mean that. This is your home." "No, it's a house. You and Daniel have made it a home. And I don't want to lose that. I don't want to lose you." Elena's eyes filled with tears. "You don't know what you're saying. You're still recovering. You're not thinking clearly." "I'm thinking more clearly than I have in years." Margaret reached across the table, taking Elena's hand. "Stay, please. Not as squatters or temporary guests. Stay as my family." "Family?" Elena's voice broke on the word. "Unless you don't want to. I understand if this is too strange, if I'm overstepping, but this past week I've felt more alive, more myself, than I have in decades. You and Daniel, you've given me that, and I'd like to give you something in return. A home, security, a place where Daniel can grow up by the ocean, where you can continue your research, where we can all heal together." Daniel looked between them, sensing something important happening, but not quite understanding. "Does this mean we can stay? I can keep my room?" Elena was crying openly now. "Margaret, you don't have to do this. You don't owe us anything. I'm not doing this out of obligation. I'm doing this because I want to. Because in 1 week, you've shown me what I've been missing my entire adult life. Connection, purpose, love." Margaret squeezed Elena's hand. "I'm not saying I have all the answers. I don't know exactly what this looks like, or how we'll make it work. But I know I want to try. If you'll let me." Elena looked at her son, at this cottage that had become their sanctuary, at Margaret, who was offering them something impossible and perfect. "Are you sure?" "Absolutely certain." "What about your company, your career in Seattle?" "I resigned yesterday, officially. I'm done with that life." Margaret smiled, feeling lighter than she had in years. "I'm thinking about opening a consulting firm, something I can run from here, on my terms. Or maybe I'll do something completely different. Help you with your research. Learn to maintain the lighthouse properly. Figure out what really matters." Daniel bounced in his chair. "Mama, say yes. Please say yes." Elena laughed through her tears. Yes, we'll stay. Thank you. Thank you so much." They ate breakfast together, the three of them, planning how to rearrange the cottage, where Elena could set up a proper workspace, how to enroll Daniel in the village school. It felt natural, right? Like pieces falling into place that Margaret hadn't even known were missing. Later, as Elena and Daniel explored the tide pools, and Margaret checked the lighthouse, Tom Willis appeared again, grinning like he knew a secret. "So I hear you've got yourself a family now," he said. "News travels fast." "Always does in a small town. Your grandmother would be pleased, you know. She always said this lighthouse needed people who cared about it, not just owned it." "Elena cares. So do you, I reckon, finally." Tom patted her shoulder. "Welcome home, Margaret." The months that followed were not always easy. Margaret had moments of doubt, wondering if she'd made the right choice, if she was cut out for this kind of life. Her former colleagues called, tried to tempt her back with offers of part-time work, consulting gigs, board positions. She declined them all. Elena had nightmares sometimes, waking with her husband's name on her lips, grieving all over again. Daniel had tantrums, as 5-year-olds do, and Margaret learned that patience was harder than any corporate negotiation she'd ever conducted. But there were good moments too. More good than bad. Margaret taught Daniel to play chess on her grandmother's old board. Elena showed Margaret how to identify dozens of species in the tide pools, how to read the weather in the behavior of birds and the smell of the air. They worked together in the garden, maintained the lighthouse, cooked meals that filled the cottage with warmth and laughter. The townspeople accepted them as a unit, this unexpected family that had formed in the lighthouse keeper's cottage. Margaret joined the town council, using her business skills to help attract sustainable tourism. Elena got a grant to continue her research, publishing papers that slowly rebuilt her academic reputation. Daniel thrived, growing confident and curious, a child of both land and sea. On the anniversary of the day Margaret had first arrived at the cottage, they climbed to the top of the lighthouse together at sunset. The ocean stretched before them, endless and beautiful, the waves catching the last light of day. "I've been thinking," Elena said, her hand finding Margaret's, "about what you said that first week, about not knowing what this would look like or how we'd make it work. We figured it out, haven't we?" "We have, but I think we could make it more official." Elena took a breath. "I've been falling in love with you, Margaret, slowly, carefully, terrified to admit it even to myself. But I am. I love you." Margaret felt her heart, that heart that had almost given up, beat strong and steady in her chest. "I love you too. I think I have since that first day, when you dropped that wooden spoon and looked at me like I was going to destroy your world. You rebuilt it instead." They kissed there at the top of the lighthouse, with Daniel making exaggerated gagging sounds below them, and the beacon beginning its nightly rotation above them. Later, much later, they would make it official with a small wedding in the cottage garden, with Tom Willis giving Elena away and half the town in attendance. Daniel would carry the rings, and the local priest would talk about lighthouses and new beginnings and the unexpected ways that love finds us. But in that moment, watching the sun set over the ocean her grandmother had loved, Margaret simply held Elena close and marveled at how life could change in a single week, how the worst moment of your life could lead you to the best. The lighthouse beam began its rotation, sweeping across the darkening water, a steady rhythm like a heartbeat. Her grandmother had been right all along. The lighthouse did wait, and when Margaret had finally come home, she had found everything she'd been missing without ever knowing she needed it. Sometimes the greatest treasures are the ones that invade your life when you least expect them, Margaret thought. Sometimes the best thing that can happen is having your plans disrupted by love. The sea rolled on below them, eternal and indifferent and beautiful, teaching them what it had taught her grandmother and countless others before them. That home is not a place, but the people who fill it with life. That the heart, when given space to heal, can expand to hold more love than you ever imagined possible. That sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let go of the life you planned and embrace the one waiting for you, messy and imperfect and absolutely right. Margaret Chen had come to the lighthouse cottage to recover from a heart attack. Instead, she had recovered her heart entirely, filled it with love and laughter and the kind of fierce, protective joy that comes from building a family not by blood, but by choice. And every night, the lighthouse kept its vigil, its beams sweeping across the water, a promise kept by her grandmother and now by her, a light in the darkness for anyone who needed to find their way home.